Hello and welcome to the Theosophical Society National Capitol Lodge in Washington, D.C. And this is our public meeting. And today we're going to have a talk by Ann Gillis. But before we move into that and her introduction, if everyone who's on will go ahead and be sure you're muted, I will read out loud the universal invocation by Annie Besant for us. O hidden life, vibrant in every atom. O hidden light, shining in every creature. O hidden love, embracing all in oneness. May all who feel themselves as one with thee know they are therefore one with every other. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to read Ann's bio here. Reverend Ann Sermons Gillis, MS, BPS in recreation therapy and gerontology, and she has a master's of science in counseling. She's a minister, and in 1984, she co-founded Connection Center for Spiritual Growth in Memphis, Tennessee, and served as a senior spiritual guide until 1998. She moved to Houston, Texas, as a result of a strong inner urging and met her mate 2 weeks after arriving. They married 5 years later. She's the founder of the Theosophy movement. Gillis has been called the foremost expert on ease. She's an international speaker, author of 5 books, a breath worker, and personal growth coach. She is a past president of the Houston Lodge of the Theosophical Society and on the national board of the Theosophical Order of Service. Gillis facilitates monthly meetings on the National Lodge papers. Ann's wisdom, humor, and exuberant presentation style make learning fun. Armed with years of experience in human dynamics, Gillis consistently delivers more than promised. She teaches people how to have accomplishment without struggle by presenting refreshing material that is immediately usable. Life is not meant to be a series of to-do lists punctuated by eating and sleeping, says Gillis. And her website will be in the details with this recording. When you get there, it's AnnGillis.com. And Ann, thank you so much for being here. I'm really looking forward to your talk, and we appreciate you coming to present for our lodge. And I will just pass it over to you if you want to go ahead and unmute and just let me know anything you need as you go forward.
Okay, thank you. I'm really glad to be here. Actually, when I send that, I actually mean for that to be your promo. I think I should just tell everybody when I'm introduced to say that she is, and I can just say I am, and just leave it at that, because all of that stuff just sounds so superfluous and so heady. I've done a lot of stuff. I acknowledge that you all have done plenty of things yourself. We are all deeply immersed in this spiritual journey, and I am thrilled that we have incarnated at the same time and that we're together. Now, this is a technological time, and if things go well, then I'm going to be able to share, and we're going to be able to get to it. Let's see if that's going to work. Okay. Okay, so it is working. So today's talk is about Henry Steele Olcott. And I've spoken to a lot of groups, and you know, this is the first group that's chosen this. I first gave this talk in Houston because I became so enamored with Henry Steele Olcott. And I put that on the list of things that I spoke about, thinking, oh, everybody's going to jump on this topic. And I was thrilled that Susanna or whoever, you know, chose this topic. I'm thrilled to be able to talk about one of my favorite people. As you all know, he was the first president of our International Theosophical Society. A friend of mine the other day asked me if I had read the book Many Lives, Many Masters, and I replied, listen, I read that about 50 years ago. There's no way I'm going to remember anything about that. And so it is true with Henry Steele Olcott, and that is that I've read a lot about him. I don't remember a lot about him, but probably have more to say today than I can get to because this was originally probably a 2-hour talk. I will send the link to this talk to Susanna, because there are some links maybe to some books or other things that you may want to look up. And so you can just contact her if you would like a copy of this. So Henry Steele Olcott was born August the 2nd, 1832, and he passed away in February of 1907. And the way that I'm going to engineer this talk is that it's going to hop a little bit all over the place. That's just the way I want it to do. We're not going to start at the beginning. We're going to start in the middle. I want to show this particular drawing of Olcott. Let me see if I can enlarge that and get this over so you can see it, because it's a very powerful drawing, but this is one that HPB, Madame Blavatsky, drew of Olcott. She was quite an accomplished artist. Now the trick will be able to get this down. Okay. And just to give you an idea, well, maybe this is the beginning, because the story goes that in Atlantis, there was a king, and he had a palace, he had a set of palace guards, and they were sent out one day on reconnaissance, and they were ambushed by someone that wanted to go and get into the kingdom. And they fought them, and the lead particular guard did a great job of vanquishing the enemies. So when they went back, the king was so impressed that he asked the head of the guard, he said, "I'd like for you to take over total security." And he said, "And I want to entrust my son with you." So he entrusted the son with him, and the guard guarded the son. And then one day, again, there were some marauders that came to attack, and they were trying to kill the son. And this guard was able to save him, only the son was wounded, and the guard was mortally wounded. But before he died, the guard and the son were taken to the king, and the king says, "Oh, thank you so much for saving my son. What can I do for you?" And the guard said, "You can allow me to serve you forever." And he took his finger and he put it on the blood on his face, and then, which was pouring from his body. He was dying. And he touched the mask, he touched the king with the blood, and he touched the child with the blood. And he said, "I want to serve you always." And the king says, "You can do that." And it said that the king was Master M, the guard was Olcott, and the son, or the prince, was Blavatsky. And I got this from the World of Theosophy magazine, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more later. But right now, I'd like to invite you to Colonel Henry Steele Olcott's inaugural address. And imagine, if you will, that you're there. You might want to close your eyes, because it's perhaps easier to experience this with your eyes closed. But you're in New York City. It's November the 17th, 1875. There's excitement in the air. This is the first meeting of the newly formed Theosophical Society. There are about 20 people, maybe less, in the room. Blavatsky is there, Judge is there, of course, Olcott is there. It's kind of chilly in the room. And just, what kind of chair are you sitting in? What kind of clothes do you have on? And you can hear a chair moving. And Henry Steele Olcott, he stands up and he walks to the podium. He's a short man, probably about 5'8", a long white beard, but he has a presence, very stately, very much knows who he is. And this is what he says. In future times, when the impartial historian shall write an account of the progress of religious ideas in the present century, the formation of this Theosophical Society, whose first meeting under its formal declaration of principles we are now attending, will not pass unnoticed. What is it then which makes me say in this deepest seriousness and the full knowledge of its truth, what is it that makes me not only content, but proud to stand for the brief moment as the mouthpiece and figurehead of this movement, risking abuse, misrepresentation, and even vile assault? It is the fact that in my soul, I feel that behind us, behind our little band, behind our feeble, newborn organization, there gathers a mighty power that can withhold the power of truth. Because I feel that we are only the advance guard, holding the place until the main body shall come up, because I feel that we are enlisted in a holy cause. So how did I fall in love with Olcott? What did that happen? Well, I held up that book earlier, and this book is one that was in the social room that was set up at one of the national conferences at Wheaton. And I picked it up and I started reading it. I was like, this is fabulous. It was the centenary copy of the World Theosophist, which was only published, I think, World Theosophy, I think it was published 1 year in California. And whoops, I don't know, let me go back. I hit the screen as I'm saying. More technologically advanced than this, but I also am kind of bumble because I'll hit the wrong thing by accident. So anyway, I loved it. So I went up to the library and I asked Marina, I said, is this anywhere online? And she said, oh no. She said, we got plenty of copies of that. You can have it. So I was absolutely thrilled. And when I got home from the National Convention, I was actually, I think that year, I was staying in my RV, and I can remember sitting in the bed in the RV, and I got up and I thought, I'm going to look at the TS Wiki, I'm going to look at the calendar and see what today is. And so when I opened it up to the calendar, it was Olcott's birthday. And I just felt this chill come upon me. And I said, okay, we've got some kind of relationship going here. And I'm not the only one that had a relationship with him. See, again, I hit the wrong button. These are really, this mouse is very, very. Now, how did this slide get here? That does not go there. So there was someone else, I think, that was very connected with him, and you've probably heard of her, Marie Hotchner, but she was also known as Marie Rusak. So I'm going to skip over this slide, though. So Marie and her maid were very startled because her father, after he died, came to her in astral form. And he said, I was contacted by several disincarnated Hindus, and they told me to come to you with this message. And that is for you to get some books on theosophy, to study them, because that will help you answer some of your questions. And so she did get those books, and she studied them for a long time by herself. And the books that she studied were the Olcott world, the occult world, esoteric Buddhism, which I don't know if any of you have read that book. I don't see how she got anything out of it. It was so confusing to me, but some people really love it. But you had to study really hard to get anything. Maybe that's the key to it. and the key to Theosophy, and Clothed to the Sun. And the key to Theosophy just really became her Bible. And that was an integral part of her life. But she decided that what she would like to do then was to join the society. She had actually thought that she wouldn't join until she had read a lot about it. And I think her father advised her that. And so she said, well, the time is ready. So she contacted him, and they were to meet. And so Olcott's on a journey, but what happened was there was plague on the journey. And I think in Italy, the ship was halted. Now, she was supposed to meet him at a certain time later on in the month, but now he was taken to another ship because he was friends with the captain, and he was put on board, and that he went directly to England. So he got there early. Nobody knew he was there. Well, Marie was told in a dream to go to Southampton, London, to meet him there, that he was going to be there. So all she had really was this information from her father. So she goes, she gets on the boat, she goes to the captain, asks for Olcott. He takes her to the cabin. She knocks on the door. Olcott was a little bit surprised because nobody knew that he was in Southampton at the time. He opens the door. She introduces herself, and he says, well, how in the world did you know that I was here? She says, well, my father told me in a dream. And she came in and they talked, and it was the beginning of quite a wonderful, wonderful friendship that they had. She was so sure that he would be there that she had already booked rooms for him. And that was really great because none of the friends knew that he was coming in. There was no way to get word to them. And so he wouldn't have really had a place to stay if she hadn't enlisted that. Now, she and her friends, she had another friend with her, and they decided that he needed some clothes. They had unpacked his clothing for him, and they found out that he had 2 pairs of socks. Both of them had holes in them. All of his underclothes were just practically tattered. So they take the clothes, they go to a store, they buy him a whole new wardrobe, they come back and they put it in his room. Well, they wanted to see what he thought when he got there, so they kind of hid in the room. Olcott opens the door, he looks at his bed and he goes, oh my gosh, I'm in the wrong room. And then they pop out and they say, surprise. And he's so gracious and so thankful for what they've done. But he says to them, he says, you're so extravagant. You shouldn't have done that. And the beginning days, and like I say, I'm skipping, I'm going to go back to more of the beginning later, but in the beginning days, Olcott and Blavatsky as well, they suffered financially. They really sacrificed. They would pawn things to keep things going, especially when they were in India. And then later, of course, Olcott went around and spoke. He traveled thousands of miles and he spoke, and he would raise money for the society. And so he ate pennies a day, which was kind of easy to do in India. But I mean, he never led a lavish life. He dressed in Indian clothes. He stood in solidarity with the same kind of lifestyle as the Indian people when he was to move there later. Now, when Rusak moved, when she sailed with Olcott to New York City, he had a series of meetings that he went to, and she went to one of these meetings. And if you've ever gone to somewhat of it wasn't really a board meeting, but these were kind of the power people in the Theosophical Society. And they were complaining and they were talking about all these issues. And Marie said that she watched Olcott in his chair, and he had gone in and he was vibrant and exuberant. I mean, he was very popular. I mean, even when she went to see him on the ship and they traveled before they came up to America a little bit, she said that, the people on the ship all knew him by name, and the children were jumping all over him. He was such a vibrant, live person. But back to the meeting, as they complained and talked, she said she saw that his energy field, it just got smaller and smaller, and he got less, and he hunched in the chair, and he looked very dejected. But afterwards, as he went on, he popped out of it, and he was very happy. But Marie herself was very depressed about this. She thought she had prepared herself to be with the people that she thought were the grandest, most spiritually adept people in the world. And her first theosophists that she met, other than Olcott, were the people in this room. And so she thought, well, now, what am I going to do? This is not the group that I want to join. But her father came to her and he said, follow the principles of theosophy. Don't follow the personalities. So principles before personalities, which I thought was an interesting use of words, since those particular words are also used often in the 12-step program. Olcott felt a deep connection with Marie and asked her to go to work for him. And she said, oh, I can't possibly do that. She was a singer. She said, I've got so many engagements, I'm not going to be able to do that. Impossible, too many obstacles. And he said, you'll be able to do it. Take care of your business, get your clothes, you're coming with me. She says, that's not happening. She goes home, a little by little, or wherever she was living at the time, little by little, all the obstacles just disappeared. And she became Olcott's personal secretary until he died. And I know that you've heard this, but Olcott brought us Theosophical Society, and Blavatsky brought us the teachings. And he was quite an organizer, which we'll go into. As I'm saying, he was born in 1832. He had 5 brothers and sisters, and he grew up living on a New Jersey farm. He went to school, and his father had financial difficulties, and he had to leave the university. I think he was 19 when he went to school. But during this time, after he left the university, he went and spent time on his uncle's farm. And that's where he was exposed to spiritualism. And they went to different spiritualist meetings. So his first experience was not when he met Blavatsky, but it was before then. And he had begun writing for some of the local newspapers, and people were fascinated with his writing, the content of his writing, and then he was a good writer as well. He was very interested in agriculture. And I mean, he had grown up, he had been on his uncle's farm, he had been around farming. I mean, this was an agricultural society, very much so in that time. And he was interested in agriculture. And he actually, by the time he was 23, he was offered the chair of agriculture in the University of Athens, and he turned it down. And later he founded some experimental farms, and they were the Westchester Farm School. And let me see, and this was one of the pioneers of our present system of natural agricultural education. He was very interested in sorghum. And so he wrote a book. I mean, he worked with it. I mean, when he did something, he did not do it. He didn't just put his finger in it. He threw his body into it. So he was probably the world's best expert on sorghum. And he wrote a book, and that book is still in libraries today. And then he was offered the directorship of the Agricultural Bureau of Washington, and he declined, but he did, oh no, he didn't go into management, as people wanted him to come manage his lands. He knew the land. I think that's a wonderful thing. He was grounded in this agriculture. He was married to the land. And speaking of marriage, he did marry, in 1860, and he was deeply in love. And the fact that she was somewhat pious and she was the daughter of a minister and he was interested in occult matters didn't keep them apart very much, but it did. They got married. They were in love. They had 4 children. Unfortunately, the 2 girls died. But over the period, you know how romances go, as they begin to see each other's foibles, and they were together day by day, and their principles for living were so different, they divorced. Now, Olcott, being the benevolent soul that he was, he took ownership of the divorce and he said, I want the divorce, I'm going to do this. He really did it for her so that she could save face with her family. He took on the blame and let her look like he was the victim of it, but really he did it for her. And that was in 1874. So which we're going to remember that date. I think that's an important date. But the Civil War broke out, and he enlisted as a signals officer. Now, a signal officer was somebody you probably know, but what they did was they held flags out to let them know certain things, and they had torches at night, and they would send signals. And during the course of this, he got malaria and he was in the hospital for quite a while. And when he got out, he was expecting that he would just go back as a signals officer. But he was asked if he would investigate fraud in the Army. And so he started investigating fraud. And he found there was this one particular man that he went after, and I think he found that it was something like $200,000 worth of fraud that he found with this particular socialite who was very popular. And he got in a little trouble because people published his findings before he had all the information together, but he was able to save face and get this information and send this like gangster to prison. And during this time, he traveled 19,000 miles with these investigations, and he interviewed 817 witnesses. He was absolutely amazing at what he was doing. He was organized, he was efficient, and he was written a letter that it said, you did more for this war by this investigation and by saving this money than if you had been in the battlefield. And as I'm saying, he was so good that then he was asked by the Navy if he would do these same kinds of inquisitions, and he did at the risk of his own life, because we're talking about mobsters and gangsters and all kinds of people that he was investigating that were married somewhat to the religion. I mean, to the government. I'm sitting here and my phone is binging, and I was distracted from this. He was also asked to investigate the Lincoln assassination. You know, he was just really well respected. And he resigned from the Army and he studied law and practiced law for a long time. So not only did he have this predisposition for the unknown, which is more often a right brain thing, he also had the legal sense of a lawyer. As a journalist, he was also really a worldly man. He partied a lot, and he was a member of the New York Lotus Club, and he was on the committee that welcomed Charles Bradlaugh. And you know, some of the people that were in this society were also Mark Twain. Other free thinkers were Albert Einstein, who you probably already know was a theosophist, even though Albert Einstein was not really he didn't participate a lot in it, but there is one time when Blavatsky and Olcott recorded their voice, and they did it in this kind of foil, and then they sent the foil to Einstein, hoping that they would be able to preserve their voices. But when the foil got there, it was so flattened out they weren't able to translate it into words, which is a loss for us. But also members of the society are Elizabeth Cady Stanton, of course, the women's suffrage movement, Robert Frost, the poet, Susan Anthony, women's suffrage again, Thomas Paine, Thomas Jefferson, Bertrand Russell, Carl Sagan. And just to connect a little bit to Annie Besant, she was a speaker for the National Secular Society, and I'm sure you all know she was the second president of our International Lodge, and she was a writer, and she was close friends with Charles Bradlaugh, who Olcott knew as well through the Lotus Club. And in 1877, they were prosecuted for publishing a book on birth control. And the scandal kind of made them famous. And she was quite an amazing person anyway. But free thought, in case you're wondering, is it was something that was born out of this almost still Victorian, straight-laced, dogmatic religious principles that we had that were domineering our country. And, you know, Olcott and many people took it on to confront this, and the Mahatmas even have done that in Mahatma letters. But free thought is a philosophical viewpoint where you use reason and logic in order to determine something. You just don't take things on blind faith. It has now become more of a pretty secular organization. It still exists. And I think that probably is very atheist, but at the time, when he was back in the late 18th century, I don't think that's the way that it operated. Just a little side note on Besant, and that was that later in Olcott's life, the Mahatmas, I guess it was Master M, told him that he was going to send someone, and that when it was time that he was to meet this person. And so Olcott packed a bag, and he left that bag packed for 1.5 years. I mean, he was so solid with this, what the masters had told him. And after about 1.5 years, he said, well, I guess I've just misinterpreted it. So he unpacks his bag. I don't even understand, the man didn't have that many clothes, but he had a bag packed. And I guess he had his one pair of his underwear packed. Who knows? But anyway, he's gone on tour with Annie Besant. And the master said, this is the one that I told you that you're going to meet. And this was before she was, she had gone on tour with him. And this is before she was in the society, I think, as I'm talking about my memory. But in addition to that, AP Senate was told 10 years before this, and this was long before she even knew about Theosophy, that he was to keep an eye on Annie Besant. So it was the masters were telling Olcott, you know, that she was coming. They were telling Senate she was coming. She was going to lead the society. And as you know, and we won't go into Besant, but she was quite a formidable force in many, many ways. He was a journalist. And I'm going to move through these kind of fast so we can get through them. And his writings on the occult were so popular that they would sell papers with his articles in them for $1. Now, I can remember when I could buy a paper for 10 cents. So $1 was a lot for a paper. Very, very powerful pieces that he wrote. And he was at the Eddy's farm. Probably all of you know that he met Madame Blavatsky at the Eddy farm, but what I didn't really realize that he was there investigating long before he met Blavatsky. You know, they became great friends, and they did meet at the farm. Probably heard the story, but if you can imagine yourself and you're still, and you walk in, and you're Olcott, and you walk into a room and you see this bright red shirt, and it was the Garibaldi shirt that's what they wore in Garibaldi's army in Italy when she supposedly fought in the army. But she's sitting there, and he just is drawn to her. And he didn't know consciously, but of course we think that this was preordained. They became great friends. She called him Maloney, and he called her Mrs. Mulligan. They had pet names for each other. We know that this was 1974. They began to meet with different leaders, and then in 75, of course, the Theosophical Society was formed. Going to move up a little bit. Now, during this time, they're in New York City, and Olcott is weighing all of this stuff. He's getting involved in something that he feels very adamant about it, but he wonders if he's going to devote his entire life to this. Now, little by little, Blavatsky had begun to break it to him that there were masters. She had known about the masters her entire life, but he didn't know. He didn't know about the masters. And so one day he's just come back from working on Isis and Veil there in the Lamasery. He goes to his room and he sits down and he catches something in his eye, in his right eye. There's a light, and he looks over and there's an Oriental man standing there in a white robe and a turban. He's absolutely mesmerized, but he's not afraid. I mean, it's a great experience. And it's a Mahatma, it's a master. And he talks to Olcott. And he says, you're going to determine whether or not we spend time together in the future. For our work is to really elevate humanity. And the master went on to tell him a lot of other things. And Olcott's sitting there and he's thinking, you know, Blavatsky's so strong, she may have just created a hallucination. You know, once he leaves, how am I even to know that he's there? And in that moment, the master, who was astral, not physical, the master takes off his turban, and this turban is an amber striped silk turban with embroidery on it, and he takes it off his head and he throws it toward Olcott, and it's a physical thing, and that was a tangible experience and effect for Olcott that would influence him and get him started on the biggest adventure of his life, and probably paved the way for some of us to have the biggest adventures of our lives as well. Now, they decided to go to India, and he had had this experience right when he was deciding to go, whether he was going to go to India or not. That seemed to be the place to go. And the reason that they went there was because of number one, let me go back. The reason that they founded the society, the Theosophical Society in the United States, because that was the best place to set it up legally. It just worked. You know, that was the place. But then they thought, to expand this, to make this a worldwide club experience society, they decided to go to India. And India has such a diverse culture. That's the reason they thought that it would work in India. Let's see, I'm going to move this. And so in 1975 in India, just say that Olcott traveled 2,000 miles north and south in India and 1,800 miles east and west. And what was he doing? He was setting up new societies. Sorry, I have to keep arranging my screen so that I can see what's written on the screen. And you probably already all know that Olcott was instrumental in reviving Buddhism in Asia. And so he and Blavatsky made their first trip to Asia, and their notoriety, or their reputations preceded them. And when they came there, there were parades, there were people shouting, they were going sadhu, sadhu, which is a Pali word that means it's like a kind of like jumping for joy. And they were all very excited, and there were thousands of flags that were waving when they came. So it was quite a procession when they came for their very first visit to Ceylon, which is, of course, now Sri Lanka. They were really that slide that I wanted that's where that slide was supposed to go, is this to go right here. But they did take the High vows, and I can't remember them right off the top of my head, but there were 5 vows that they took. I'll try to remember one of it's not to harm anything, not to, get drunk, alcohol and drugs. I don't remember the other 3, but they did take the vows, and they were the first well-known European or Western people to take these vows of Buddhism. As a matter of fact, later on in his career, Olcott was given dispensation to give these vows to other people as well, which was really just unheard of. And I'll just add this, and that is that he was quite a smoker, and he started that after the war to end pain. And as Blavatsky was as well, as you probably know, she smoked up to 200 cigarettes a day. And he was not a vegetarian, but he and Blavatsky both went long periods of time with a vegetarian diet. And the reason that they didn't do it was because when they were traveling, often they couldn't get food, they couldn't eat without having meat. So Olcott did start many schools in Sri Lanka and Ceylon, as well as in this country. I mean, when I say this country, I mean India. Also, Olcott was instrumental. He was on the committee to create the Buddhist flag, and that flag is used until today. So, as I said, many schools, 400 schools, including the Ananda College. And to this day, he is worshipped. There's a not worshipped, but saluted, honored as there's a Henry Olcott Day in Ceylon. Some Buddhists really believe that Olcott had taken the Bodhisattva vows at the feet of the Buddha. And he says that the Bodhisattva's life grows in different stages. And so Buddhadasa, and you can read the last name there on the slide, said, "We don't know what stage of attaining the Buddhahood he was at, but may we be alive then so we can benefit from his attainment, learn his dharma and sacred law, and obtain nirvana." Want to talk about his healing career, or maybe not career, but there was the Catholics were getting into healing, and this was in India. I think the Christians had been already established in India for 13 centuries before this time. And Olcott says, "Us Buddhists, we got to do something, because the Christians are going to take over the healing if we don't do something. All the Buddhists are going to go over to the Christians, and we need to do something about healing." And he studied mesmerism, and he was at a party, and someone says, "Well, you're talking about healing. We got someone we want you to work with." And so they brought him a man he was crippled on the left side. His arm was crippled, his hand was crippled, his left side was crippled. And he had an inner voice that said, "This is your chance, work with this guy." So he passed his hands over him a few times, and he said, "I hope you'll feel better." Well, the next day, the man comes in, he runs in, and he says, "Oh, thank you so much. I'm so much better." And Olcott continued to work with him over the next few days until he was able to, when he had a crippled hand, he couldn't move it. He was able to write with his hand. He was able to move his body. He was able to jump. And there are many, many occasions in which Olcott was able to heal people. He became so popular that he was met by thousands of people. Thousands of people. The only thing I can really say was it was miraculous. They say that in 1 year that he healed over 8,000 people. So many people were coming that he had to tell the newspaper to tell them that he wasn't going to heal anybody unless they brought written permission to be healed, because there were so many people. But he himself devised a method in which he would look at the people and divide them. He could see auras, and he divided them into 3 different sections. And those were the ones that he knew that he could heal, the ones that were marginal, and the ones that he knew that he couldn't heal. That way he could let them go. And because at the beginning he was working with everyone, and he found that some people weren't, it just didn't work. But then he found out that he could figure out which ones worked and which ones didn't work. And so finally, the masters said, you can't do this anymore because it's taking too much energy from you. Let me go back. So I'm going to share some cures from him. 2 cures. And one is to lay on the ground at the trunk of a tree, a healthy fir or pine or spruce tree, or against the trunk, stand against the trunk, and just receive that energy and do that daily. I've also heard of that as a cure for people who were drug addicted, because their aura has so many breaks on it that they get a lot of negative energies in, and so you can restore that vital energy of the aura by being on a tree. And the other was to drink mesmerized water. I meant to look up how to do mesmerized water, but you can Google mesmerizing water, because he thought that that was an incredible cure, as well as being out in the sun. I'm not going to go into that, and breathing deeply, but I'm saying if you want to see some of these slides, you can get that from Susanna. Islam, he was invited once to speak, and he found out the day before that he was supposed to speak on Islam. He didn't know that. He didn't know that much about the Muslim religion, and so he got a Quran and he spoke. And afterwards, someone came up to him and said, "Oh, you are so learned in Islam, could you teach my children?" So he was a fast study, but he intuitively understood the truth. There are many books that Olcott has written. I'm not going to go over them all, but I will say that I have links to the old diary leaves. These are the 6 volumes that he wrote from 1874 to 1898. These are the links to the old diary leaves if you'd like to read his diary leaves. I've just got some words from Olcott. He did write People from the Other World. I think you can find that in PDF, but these are of his experiences at the Eddy farm. And I know that we're about out of time, so I want to get to these. This is a link to online books. And that is that when Olcott was, he was on a ship and he fell, he was climbing down the steps and he fell head over heels on the deck. And he was greatly injured. And it was amazing that he didn't die, but he came home and he died a few months later. But a couple of weeks before he died, he was visited by the masters and they said, "Your work is done." And he wrote this before he died. And he asked that this be read at his funeral. And along with that, he asked that all the books from the different religions be placed at the head of the funeral pyre, and that people that were representative from those religions read from this. And he wrote, his final words to us were, "To my beloved brothers in the physical body, I bid you all farewell in the memory of me. Carry on the grand work of proclaiming the living brotherhood of religions to my beloved brothers." Evidently, I did a voice to text transcript. Let me start and see if I can do it better, because I don't have the periods in here. I didn't edit this real well. "To my beloved brothers in the physical body, I bid you all farewell in memory of me. And on the grand work of proclaiming the living brotherhood of religions, to my beloved brothers on the highest planes, I greet and come to you. I implore you to help me impress on all men on the earth that there is no religion higher than the truth, and that in the brotherhood of religion lies the peace and progress of humanity." I'll correct that when I send that to y'all. I tell you, this voice to text is absolutely wonderful. So now I've stopped the sharing. I don't know that there's time for any questions, but I hope that you'll just get a little bit of his life and be inspired by his life. He's an incredibly inspiring person.
Thank you so much, Anne. That was fantastic. And it's clear to see that we will all enjoy going through the slides and diving a little deeper. You did have so much information to offer us. So if you're open to it, we have about 10 more minutes. So are you open to questions or?
Absolutely.
Okay, anybody have any questions or comments?
Comments, yeah.
I'll throw something in there because I'm always like, okay, no one's talking, I'll talk. The idea of the mesmerized water, I don't know per se exactly what it would be, but I do know a process with water that is, I did a presentation on water a while ago. Water has like memory. It like absorbs emotions. It absorbs, like you can put something next to water and it will absorb the character of what, you know, is near it. So I believe probably what the mesmerized water would be is to take the water, say a prayer over it, set an intention into it. Some people would even write an intention on a piece of paper, set the glass on top of the water, leave it overnight and drink that water in the morning with that intention. So I'm guessing it's something along those lines, is imbuing the water with a particular energy of intention. So there's my my thoughts on that one.
And I think the kahunas also say that you can solarize water. You take your water and you put it out in the sun, and then you drink the sun water. So we're talking about, you know, using our energy to, you know, drink something from the water that it takes the intention of the sun, which I believe is a living body of information and energy, and probably a lot more than we think and know.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, along with that, there is the idea of putting your water out under the full moon. It's a lot of, you know, a spell work, I would say, like some people would use it that, but sort of the same idea is that, you know, imbue it with something. And then the actual water changes. And then when you drink it, it interrelates with your own physical and I suppose emotional being. Arnie, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for that wonderful talk. Because it was the first time I'm hearing a talk on Olcott, although I read about it. Two things I would like to share. In India, we have this habit of keeping water always in the shrine in our homes, because it keeps the energy in the shrine intact. So water is very holy here. And in fact, it is also said one needs to use flowing water rather than stagnant water for a good ablution. So that's again energy flow. So something connected with what Desiree was saying. And number two, you said about his talk on Islam, but the more famous one is his talk in Bombay on Zoroastrianism, which I was surprised because he seems to have been quite, as you said, I mean, about Islam. The talk which I read about Zoroastrianism, the research on the Theosophical contribution, which is as deep as he did in Sri Lanka for Buddhism. Theosophy also revived Zoroastrianism among the younger generation during his time in Bombay. So that's news for many of you. But then, since I was doing a little research on that, I was just trying to share his talk in Bombay on Zoroastrianism is also famous. Thanks.
Yes, he actually tried to stand behind all the religions, and in Zoroastrianism, some people said that he was there at the beginning, that he was in Persia in a previous life. He was a Zoroastrian, and so he honored that religion a lot. As I was saying, there's just too much for me to talk about. I mean, you can imagine if somebody said, "Will you give me the story of your life?" A long time.
And I'll say your name wrong again, Cathcota. Go ahead, you're muted still.
Shiva, you're muted. You're muted, Shiva.
Okay.
She's got it. I'll call you Shiva now on.
Yes. So the Olcott old diary leaves, the way he mentions about touring in the South India, in the remote corners. Yeah, just going by even in the bullock carts. He moved
Yeah.
in
Oh,
the
yeah.
bullock cart. Really, really amazing. And how he just slept wherever possible, wherever, without any complaint about staying, and then eating whatever it is available, and all these sacrifices, really amazing. And you see, in many in remote villages, where nowadays even we find it difficult to go there, such places he toured and started. Really amazing, Olcott. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, Leadbeater, when he was younger, went on one of those journeys with him to India. And there was another, I forgot the other person. There were two people along with him, and I think they traveled for like 3 months. And Leadbeater said that he was amazing, that he never complained, that he was always jovial. And as you're saying, they had to, their carts would get stuck in this ruts and this mud, and and Olcott was just unflappable.
Yeah. That's interesting, in what you shared here. So I would think that being in a war probably helped prepare him for that. He's probably like, oh, this is nothing. But also that at the other end, he was a man about town, enjoying fine dining and the intellectual company. And so quite the range of his life experiences.
Well, that's why some people compared Olcott to Buddha, because they said that Buddha gave up everything. He was from a royal family. He gave up all of his material things. And Olcott basically did. He gave up his position. He gave up his country. He lived in relative poverty, compared to what we live in. And so he is compared to Buddha in terms of the way that he conducted his life, that transition, because Buddha made the same transition from wealth, from notoriety and so forth, into this life of austerity.
Yeah, thank you. And Shiva, did you have another comment?
I think you're saying goodbye.
I don't know, yeah, because you don't have another comment? Okay, because I took the hand down, then went back up. So I thought, oh, I didn't mean to do that if he still had another comment. Anyone else? Well, if there's no other comments, I know we all look forward to going through this information again. We'll share that with the recording, and really appreciate your talk. I didn't really know much about him at all, so I do personally appreciate what you shared, and look forward to reading more. And
if you're not on, if you're not on Susanna's list, I guess you are on the mailing list if you're on here, because I will send the PowerPoint to her, because there are a lot of links there.
Yeah, and you said you have a YouTube channel. How will people find you there for other talks and information?
Oh yeah, I've got quite a number. I think I work on 6. I'm on a Buddhist channel, this, that, and the other. But the one that's the only, I think I just have Facebook. Theosophy Speaks is my Facebook, and I don't put a whole lot on that. But I have the interviews I do are on the Theosophical Order of Service Up for America. And that's where I do the interviews. And Susanna was interviewed on there, if you haven't had a chance to listen to her interview. And as well as Shiva and Ed Abdul, just people,
Very interesting. Thank you. I think that would be one of the in the beginning when I read your biography. I think one of the drawbacks potentially with the Theosophical Society is that most don't want to talk about themselves. They say, oh, no, I'm not going to tell you. But I didn't even know that our members had been interviewed, probably because they were being very modest and didn't share that. I'd love to find out more about those things. So thank you for telling us. And I will make sure that, Susanna will make sure that those are tied to, because she takes care of still sending out the recordings, and she's always on top of that. So thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, and I guess thank you. And I guess that's it. I'll go ahead and close the meeting, and thank you everyone for being here. See you next week.
Thank you, Anne, for the nice presentation.
Yes. Thank you. I'll be talking to you.
Thank you.
Alrighty. Bye-bye.